Good morning, Rabotai. Breakfast is dedicated today in loving memory and Lilui Nishmat Avraham ben Farida Alav Hashalom, sponsored by his grandson Morris Franco. And this week, of course, of Cold Brew is dedicated in loving memory of Sammy Sayed, Lilui Nishmat Shlomo ben Rivka, sponsored by his son Isaac Sayed. Rabotai, there's a very interesting development in this parasha. We find this guy Esav, who's such a wicked person, and yet there's one mitzvah that Esav does. Not just he does as a mitzvah, but he does it so well that the Gemara tells us something astounding. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai writes that my whole life I did the mitzvah of Kibbud Avaim, and I never reached the feet of Esav. Why? It says Esav, whenever he would honor his parents, he's different than me. If I have to go give my father a bath, if I need to take my dad or my mother, I need to clean them, I need to take care of them and fix the house, I need to prepare them something to eat. He says, so I take off my suit and I put on, some garbage clothes. I come, so I'm not going to get my nice clothes dirty. I'm not going to get it smelly. I'm not going to get it covered in bath water or whatever. But Esav was exactly the opposite. Esav had his bigdei chamudot, his very special clothing that he got from Nimrod, which came all the way from Adam Arishon, the clothing that Yaakov took and wore when he went to get the Be'achot from his father. Esav, he would save his clothes for what? For when he was serving his father. Ishtabach Shemo. So I'm dressing down to do it, and Esav Harasha dressed up to do it. Rabbi Tarfon, by the way, same thing. Gemara tells us that Rabbi Tarfon, he respected his mother so much that when one time they were walking and one of her sandals broke. So now she has her foot, she's going to step with her foot on the ground. Rabbi Tarfon, the big Tana, okay, the rabbi of Rabbi Akiva, okay, he gets down on his hands and knees and he's crawling in front of his mother. Each 2 steps she takes, he puts his hand down, so she steps with the bare foot on his hand. And he crawls more, hand, foot, like that. Could you imagine the humiliation, the degradation of the great tzaddik, Rabbi Tarfon, and all the Torah that he has? How could it be? And yet, the Gemara tells us, Rabbi Tarfon says, he was less than Esav's Kibbud Avaim. So this always bothered me. How is it possible that you have a person who's such a rasha, who's so bad, who's a murderer, who's a rapist, who's a this, he's a ganav, he's a how could he have had such strong kibud avaim? How could it be?
That was his thing.
So Sammy, you're saying that was his thing. I don't know if that's enough. That doesn't quiet my question for me.
He got it on a barbecue.
And not only that, by the way, we know that for his mother, he didn't have the same respect. He had Kibbud Av, but not Vaem. And yet, Esav, as it says, the reason why, Midrash tells us, his head was zocheh to be buried. They chopped off his head before he died. Okay? Chushim ben Dan chops off his head. The head of Esav rolls into the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. That's where it's supposed to be buried, with the greatest tzaddikim that ever lived, the pairs, Adam and Chava, Avraham and Sarah, ultimately Yitzchak and Rivka and Yaakov and Leah. Okay? But at the time, Esav's head is buried there. Why? Because whenever his father would ask him for something, he would use the expression al roshi. In Arabic, they say, how do we say it, Rafi? Al arasi. How would you use that? Where would that expression, what does that expression mean when you say al arasi? What does it mean?
At any cost, basically.
At any cost. Even if the cost is my head. Unbelievable. So Esav's expression, al roshi, was something that was purified, so to speak, that gave him the zechut that his head should be buried in the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. I added one other element to this in my understanding, and that was as follows. Okay? We know there's a very famous idea that we say, Mimini Michael. Umisimoli, Gabriel. Milfanai, Uriel. Umeachorai, Raphael. Ume'al Roshi, Shechinat Kel. And above, Ume'al Roshi, from above my head, that's where the Shekhinah rests. It's describing the fact that Am Yisrael, the Navi is saying as well, that he was surrounded by the guardian angels of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that above his head was the Shekhinah. Esav understood that on some level, he couldn't worship God. He found it too difficult to be a true Eved of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But he understood Al Roshi, that everything that he did for his father, Al Roshi, was in some way also a kavod, a respect that he was showing the Shekhinah. Okay? He was showing the great and the holy presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabotai, it says by Avraham Avinu, that, by Moshe, excuse me, many centuries later, that when Moshe is traveling through the desert, he visits, he sees, he has to go up against the great Og Melech HaBashan. And it says that Moshe was very afraid. Rashi says, why was Moshe afraid? Here's a guy, he's a big adversary, no problem, I get it. But Moshe Rabbeinu himself was the one that said, Al tira ve'al techa, don't be afraid, don't be trembling, don't worry about all these great nations that are stronger than you. Hashem yilachem lachem, Hashem's going to fight for you. How come all of a sudden when it comes to Og, Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid? Answers Rashi, quotes the Gemara, he was afraid of the zechut that Og Melech HaBashan had. What was the zechut? Og, we know, was the one that in the pasuk it says, Vayavo hapalit. He came and he told Avraham Avinu that Sarah Imenu, that Lot, was taken. So he did a favor for Avraham. The favor that he did from Avraham is considered zechut. Rabotai, the Baalei Musar point out, why was Og coming to give this message to Avraham? Why all of a sudden it's Og's job to deliver the news? What's the story? Og used to come to Avraham and say, you give us 22 minutes? What's the, is that what it was? The answer is, it says, Vayavo Palit, what he wanted was that Avraham would go to war against the 4 kings to go save Lot. Of course he's going to get killed. And then what will happen? Sarah Imenu will be available back on the market. And Og will marry the beautiful, the illustrious, the noble princess Sarah Imenu. So his motives were rotten. And yet, Moshe Rabbeinu, hundreds of years later, is still worried that zechut is enough that when Moshe Rabbeinu goes to battle with him, he's going to lose because of that zechut. Rabotai, that's very difficult to understand. The Gemara tells us about a certain rabbi whose name was Rabbi Yochanan, who was a tremendous tzaddik, tremendous Talmid Chacham. He has spent his whole life Torah, Ma'asim Tovim, to the point he got to such a level that he was able to achieve Tehiyat HaMetim. That's what it says about him. He could bring someone back with his prayers from the dead. Crazy. He asks and prays to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to let him know in whose section is he sitting in Gan Eden. See, I remember when I first learned this Gemara, I was like, Shema Yisrael. What is in sections? It's like Yankee Stadium. You're in D126, right? Bifledge. You work your whole life to get to Gan Eden, then you sit next to some annoying guy for eternity. Shema Yisrael, who's always asking for hot dogs. I don't know, I was nervous. So the Gemara says he wanted to know in whose mechitza, who's sitting with me, who's in my section, who am I near? Min HaShamayim, they revealed to him that it was Nanas HaKatzvi, that there was a certain butcher in town. It's a very short man, like a midget almost, okay? The midget butcher, that's the one that you sit in his. So he's thinking, what, after everything, I'm sitting next to a butcher? What, it was his, was his short ribs, like they say, his short ribs were heaven? That's how he got there? He goes to follow the guy around. Could you believe this story? He sees that every second that there's no customers, looks right, left down the street, shuts the store. He goes running. He opens up again because there's another customer. He opens the store. The second no customer, shuts the store again. He's wondering, what's the guy doing? He sees this butcher every single second of the day that he didn't have to be working. He ran and was taking care of his elderly parents. Rabbi Yochanan says after he sees this, Baruch Hashem, that I merited to be in the same mechitza as him. Our rabbis tell us, the pasuk says about a person who honors their parents, lema'an yarichun yamecha, in order that you should have lengthy days. Not only is it a sigula for long life in this world, but it's a sigula for long life in the next world. In other words, a beautiful olam haba. There was once a man who came to the Hafetz Chaim, to the Chazon Ish, I think, and he said to him, Rabbi, I know I'm supposed to honor my parents. He says, Bezor, I don't know of any time. But I'm learning, I'm working, I'm taking care of my kids. Where do I have time in my day to take care of my parents? The rabbi smiles, he says, that's why it says, L'ma'an yarichun yamecha. Take care of your parents, don't worry. You worry that you're losing parts of your life. Hashem will make it up to you by letting you live very long. Okay? So here we find Esav, of all the mitzvot in the Torah, the one that speaks to him most is honoring his father. He literally shows kavod to the Shekhinah al Roshi by serving his father. That's maybe why also Yaakov was nervous to go against him for the berachah, just like we saw by Moshe. He was afraid to go up against Og because of the zechut that he had, the zechut of Kibbud Avaim. Rabotai, they say about the Chazon Ish when he was a young boy, 7 years old. So his mother sees everyone's eating at the table, and she notices Hadda sitting there like daydreaming. So she tells him, how come you're not eating? So the kid is very shy. He says to his mother, he says, I don't have a fork. Nobody gave me a fork. 7 years old. Anyway, the mother gets up. She looks at the Chazon Ish in front of him. Not only did they forget a fork, they didn't give him any food. But even at the age of 7, he didn't want his mother to feel bad that she didn't give him food. So how did he say the reason why? Is it because I didn't get a fork? Unbelievable. Look at that sensitivity. There's a rabbi, his name is Rabbi Zlibansky, okay? He got sick, unfortunately, with a very serious disease that caused him to lose a tremendous amount of weight. Maybe it was Crohn's or colitis, okay? He went to a stick. Whenever he would visit his parents, Rabotai, he would put on 2 sets of clothing. So it would look like he was fuller, so his parents would not have tsar, where they wouldn't look at him and feel, look how thin you look. You're not eating, you're not taking care of yourself. Look at the great Gidolim, what they did. But Rabotai, what I learned from Esav, and it's a gift from God that Esav was so good at it, it teaches us, even if a person's not such a big tzaddik, they still have the opportunity to be able to give kavod to their parents. But Rabotai, the idea of giving kavod to your parents, it's multifaceted. One way of doing kavod for your parents is like it says, go get me something to eat. Like Yitzhak tells Esav, go hunt for me, bring me back dinner. Give me something that I enjoy. Like the way I love him. That's one way of doing it. But Rabotai, it's not always that's the only way to do it. One of the reasons why I considered moving back here so strongly is because I knew that for my parents, that was very important. That I should be back here in America, be at the family simachot. And I knew as well that being a rabbi, taking a job like this in the community over here would make my father very happy and make him very proud. I didn't give him any food to eat. But perhaps much more than giving him a meal was the fact that you brought such hana'ah to your parent. Rabotai, that's a job of each and every person. And one of the beautiful things about that idea, that giving hana'ah to your parents, that's kavod avai. Can we agree? That's kavod, right? It's a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous chidush this. And the reason why it's so important is because whereas you could give someone to eat and take care of them and give them a bath if they're in this world, you could give them hana'ah and enjoyment and nachat by your actions even when they're in the next world. That nachat is something which is like we call, some languages are international, some languages are intergalactal. They're universal. They speak the language both of Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. Rabotai, if a person has a parent that has passed away, there's something that they could do for them each and every day. That they could use or refine one of the midot that person does and bring that into their daily life or their weekly life or whatever. And they know as well that that's something that's very powerful and brings tremendous nachat to them as well. So I'll leave you with this last question. So how was it indeed that Esav, someone who poo-pooed everything else, was able to do this mitzvah specifically? How was it? I think there's something remarkable about this. We talked yesterday about the fact that Esav Asui comes from a nature where everything that he did was without any boundaries. He exercised zero self-control. Rabotai, listen to this. Listen to this. Of the two of his parents, Yitzchak represented something that Esav could not find even a drop of in himself. So the man of no self-control looked at Yitzchak, who was the pinnacle of Givurah, the pillar of self-control, and he had the utmost respect for him. Sometimes the way a person finds respect and is able to respect their parents in a proper way is by recognizing something about them, some element of their personality, or gifts that they gave, or ways that they were, which you don't have, or maybe people today don't have. A big part of the job of Kibbud Avayim is not just what you do for your parents, but in coming to see them in a way where you can't help but give and show them respect and nachat. When you think about things that they did, and I always say this in many of the classes whenever I'm mentioning my father, to think about the idea of at 17 running away for religious freedom, to be able to do more, to be able to risk your life for that. My mother, the same, grew up in South Bend, Indiana, same thing. To decide at such a young age, without anyone in her life making her do it. You know, her family around her wasn't religious. You know, for her to decide and to have the strength of character to stand up and say, if this is right, this is what I'm going to chase. And to do that by herself. And eventually to go to Israel for that. It's a remarkable thing. When a person sees that in their parents, or they find something in their parents, let's say you're 100 miles an hour, look at your parents and see how they're patient. You know, you're running out of shul, look at how your father loved to say the mizmorim in the Beit HaKnesset. You know, you're a person who likes to get things done. Your father had the ability to sit and haki with someone and make them feel good for 3 hours. You see, you find things in them that perhaps stick out, that are different to you. Most of the time, the things that we respect about others are things that we don't have in ourselves, because we can't fathom that thing. I think as well, that explained what happened with Esav, where he found this disparity between him and his father, and that caused even a hardened Rasha to have this kind of level of respect for his dad. May we each be zocheh to fulfill this unbelievable mitzvah, the mitzvah of Kibbud Avayim, to the highest degree, whether our parents are with us in this world, whether they are in the next. The mitzvot that we do of bringing them nachat and hana'ah, fulfill the dictum of kabed avicha ve'et imecha, and be'ezrat Hashem, through that we should be zocheh la'arichut yamim v'shanim bazeh u'baba be'ezrat Hashem. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen. Rabbi